Hi, this is Danielle Kepperling, host of the Practical Preservation Podcast. And I wanted to tell you about something exciting that Jonathan and I have been working on. It's the Kepperling Preservation Hub, and it is an online resource center that you can find a lot of answers to your questions. Um, it's how to blog post, videos, links with resources, downloadable PDF books, one about common mistakes that people make, and one about finding a contractor. There's training videos. There's also a podcast transcript archive. There's a one on one consult with me. And twice a month, we're going to have virtual coffee breaks where you can jump on a Zoom with me and Jonathan and have your questions answered. Sometimes we'll also have special guests that will be experts in their specific trade that will be able to also answer your questions. And for a limited time, you can get the founder's rate, which is $10 off per month for the lifetime of your membership. And when you figure it out, it's like getting a few months a year for free. Anyway, I just wanted to tell you about that and let you know that we're very excited. We've been working hard on it. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Send a message through one of our social media channels, send me an email, call, however it works to reach out. But we hope that you'll join us in the hub, and we look forward to getting to know you and your house a little better.
Thank you for tuning in to the Practical Preservation Podcast. Please take a moment to visit our website, practicalpreservationservices.com, for additional information and tips to help you restore your historical home. If you've not done so, please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, and also like us on Facebook. Welcome to the Practical Preservation Podcast, hosted by Danielle and Jonathan Kepperling. Kepperling Preservation Services is a family-owned business based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, dedicated to the preservation of our built architectural history for today's use as well as future generations. Our weekly podcast provides you with expert advice specific to the unique needs of renovating a historic home, educating by sharing our From the Trenches preservation knowledge and our guests' expertise, balancing modern needs while maintaining the historical significance, character, and beauty of your period home.
Today on the Practical Preservation Podcast, I have with me Melanie Lytle. She's the owner of Glaze Craft Windows, and also, give me your title. I forgot to ask you that.
I am the Assistant Professor of Practice of Historic Preservation and the Director of Goucher College's Master of Arts in Historic Preservation.
Okay, thank you so much. So tell me about your background.
Well, I always love to hear that answer or that question answered by people in historic preservation, because everyone seems to have a really interesting story about how they found this field.
Yes.
And I think probably what makes my story unconventional is that I found it fairly early on. I was a kid who loved history. I took one wrong turn at the beginning of university and I decided to study business science marketing. Realized very quickly this was not where I belonged, made a quick correction, and went on to study history, particularly focusing on early American history and women's history, and graduated with a bachelor's degree in history with this idea that I wanted to go into public history, work in museums or historic sites, but I wasn't really sure how that was going to happen yet. And so I sent out my resume by email to all of the companies in the city where I was living at the time, which was San Diego, California, who had historians on staff, and just said, would you hire me as a researcher or as an assistant historian? And one of these companies called me back, and they did hire me. And I discovered this field of cultural resource management, the regulatory side of historic preservation, that we have all these laws in this country that require local, state, federal agencies to consider the effects that their projects are going to have on cultural resources.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this whole career path of people who help these sorts of, clients get through this process. And I very quickly, was sent out into the field, and my first task was to document this 1960s architect designed home in La Jolla, California. And I just loved it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And over the next few years, I got to do just a wide range of different types of work. I was documenting, irrigation ditches out in the California desert. I was documenting mid-century modern residential neighborhoods in Southern California. I was documenting old streetcar lines. A lot of this, I was involved in the Yosemite National Park's Mariposa Grove work. I got to work on a Frank Lloyd Wright property. And I dove right in. And about a year into this work, my boss took me aside and he said, you really should consider getting a master's degree in this so that you can sign your own reports and, proceed in this work. And I
Yes.
thought, oh, okay. Except that I didn't want to leave my job behind.
Uh-huh.
So at the time, there were very few there still are very few distance programs in
Mm-hmm.
order to get a master's in historic preservation. And I discovered Goucher College out in Baltimore, Maryland, and enrolled in that program while I continued to work full time as an architectural historian back in
Uh-huh.
California, going out to Baltimore every summer for our annual residencies. And that really gave me the theoretical and technical grounding in order to be able to improve my work. And in
Yeah.
the midst, I moved to a larger consulting company, and I started working for a lot of federal agencies, working all over the country, doing a lot of like cell phone tower coalition
Oh, yeah.
co-locations, and
Those
a
come up
lot
a
of,
lot.
yeah, not so much anymore because they've come up with a programmatic agreement that
Yeah.
streamlined the review. But and that Amtrak was one of my clients for like a decade because they're working on bringing up all of their historic train stations to be ADA
Mm-hmm.
compliant, and
We
that's
actually just finished a project doing that. Yeah.
fantastic. Then you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I really enjoyed that work too. And, in the midst of all that consulting, I took some time away. A couple of years I spent as an assistant at an architectural easement organization in Washington, D.C. once I moved east. I also spent 5 years as the executive director of the Maryland Association of Historic District Commissions. So I got to really dive into like what happens at the local level
Mm-hmm.
in preservation. How do we make these design decisions?
Yes. Yeah.
And then, I started teaching at the Goucher program not long after I graduated, and then they invited me to direct the program back in 2019. And so that became my full-time gig
Mm-hmm.
about 5 years ago. And frankly, it's the most satisfying work I've ever been able to do.
Oh,
Oh, and of
that's
course, I
exciting.
picked up window restoration a few
Yes.
years ago too, which I don't think I have a terribly uncommon career path when it comes to preservation. I think many of us
Mm-hmm.
end up sitting at all these different seats at the
Yes. Yeah.
table throughout our career. And it's been so enriching to be able to go from everywhere from academia to window restoration and historic trades.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And it gives different perspectives. Because I am part-time at the trust, but then I also, work in our company and, directly, restoring buildings. And then, but then also I volunteer on our city's review board. So like I get like all the perspectives.
Yeah,
So it is
exactly. I think
very
that's what makes
interesting.
this career path
Yeah.
just so interesting.
Yeah. 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 I agree. So what drew you into preservation?
I got to it as a historian. I just
Mhm.
loved the stories that were in
Yeah.
places. And then when I got that first job and discovered that, oh my goodness, there's this whole architectural history area of expertise that
Hmm.
I could learn. And then I learned the policy side of it. And there's always been something new to learn.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that continues to intrigue me. And especially, I would say, in the last 8 to 10 years, a lot of my motivation comes from my desire to make sure that the work we're doing as preservationists is helping the communities in which we are working.
Yeah. Yeah.
That we're not just, and this is what I mean when, you'll see something about the Goucher program or about in my bio that I'm someone who's focused on people-centered or
Hmm.
community-centered
Yeah.
preservation. And what I mean by that is that, these buildings are simply containers
Hmm.
for our histories,
Yeah.
for the values that we hold. They're so tied to our individual identities
Yeah.
and to our values and to things that are important to us in so many ways, from the individual level all the way up to sort of national identity.
Yeah.
And in any way that I can direct our work that puts people at the center of it, that goes from taking a building as sort of this historic artifact to be curated versus a place that can be revitalized and thriving for the
Mhm.
people who care the most about it. I'm always seeking opportunities for that.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And anybody that's listened to the podcast knows that there's a book that was actually written by a political scientist called Slavery in the North. And I joke that I don't think he knew he was writing a preservation book, but it really was a preservation book. It was talking about how these places, these touch points, remind us of our history. When people move away, people die, those stories get forgotten unless people have these buildings around them to remind them, or these whatever the landscape is. And I've thought about that a lot, and since I read that probably over the pandemic, because it was like an online book club that recommended it. But yeah, I agree. It can do multiple things. The buildings can do multiple things.
Yeah, one of my favorite books in preservation that I like to introduce my students to in their first semester is Tom May's Why Old Places Matter.
Mm-hmm.
And he lays out these 14 reasons why old places matter. And they do seem to cover everything and all of the various reasons that draw people into this work, from, an appreciation for the beauty and the art of so
Right.
many of our historic places, which I appreciate too. And I want to preserve, to their educational role, to their part in our identities, to the part in our overall well-being.
Yes.
There's so many benefits to the work that we do.
Yes, there are. So tell me about your company, Glaze Craft Windows.
Yeah, so I launched Glaze Craft Windows a couple of years ago. Back in during the pandemic, 2020, there were some movements. I was starting to see some activity in the field. The Advisory Council for Historic Preservation released this statement about the revitalization of the historic trades.
Mm,
Preservation Maryland launched their
yes.
campaign
Yeah.
for historic trades. There was a lot of activity going on, and as the director of a graduate program, I am always trying to keep an eye out for trends in our field
Mhm.
and getting a sense of how to best prepare the students who are
Yeah.
going through my program for the careers that they are likely to go into. Now, the Goucher program is a hybrid, sort of in-person, remote program. And
Yeah.
so we've never had the format to be able to spend enough time to actually teach our students a trade.
Like
We've
hands-on. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. We use our time together in residency as much as we can for the hands-on component, but generally our curriculum has focused on theory, policy,
Mhm.
practice, documentation, which is fine. And so there are limits to what I could do in the Goucher program to bring in the historic trades. But I thought that if I'm going to learn what's going on and understand this trend, I really should just dive in and
Uh-huh.
do it.
Yeah.
And wood window restoration is a really good entry point for that. I reached out to a woman who had been a special speaker at Goucher a couple of years previously, Pam Howland, who had started the Old Window Workshop up in Springfield, Massachusetts, which was this co-op of a lot of Spanish-speaking and Black women who came together, shared a workspace, but had their own businesses restoring wood windows.
Hmm.
And I was really inspired by her philosophy that historic wood window restoration wasn't some sort of it wasn't a craft just on its own. It was about community. It was about creating dignified work
Hmm.
for people who needed it. And bringing people together, especially women. And so
Yeah.
when I thought, oh, okay, I'm going to look into this, I'm going to try to learn this, I called Pam up and said, would you teach me how to do this? And she agreed, and I spent a lot of time with her up in Massachusetts learning the trade from her. And then I had the opportunity within a few months to spend a year at Clark Summit University working on their wood windows there. The president of the university, who's also my dad, very conveniently, who is also a lover of history, said, well, if you want to learn this, I've got hundreds of wood windows up here on campus. Just come up, we'll give you workshop space, take your time, figure it out. And we'll
Uh-huh.
be glad for any work that you did. So I went up there and restored as many windows as I could. And about halfway through the year, he said, this is bigger than you.
Yeah.
Would you consider designing an apprenticeship program
Oh,
and
yeah.
leading a group of our students this coming summer so that we can restore a lot more
Yes.
of
Yeah.
these windows. So yes, of course. Educator, I'm like, yes, can I design a new curriculum? Absolutely. So over the summer of 2022, I worked with a crew, all-women crew of students and faculty in a 15-week paid full-time internship in which they learned every step of the window restoration process. And we restored these just iconic bowed sash and beautiful office windows in this building. And it was again, such an enriching experience to work alongside these women because it was more than just learning a craft. It was character building. It was learning about history for all of these young women who hadn't really thought about it
Mhm.
before.
Yeah.
I just loved it. And at the end of that year, I moved to Winchester, Virginia, and officially started my business at Glaze Craft Windows. And I do it part-time
Uh-huh.
because my primary employment is at Goucher College. But I really enjoy working with my clients. My clients tend to be individuals who don't have to do it,
Right.
but they're choosing to do
Mhm.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're reaching out to me. There's a draw. I think a lot of them are drawn in. They're interested in wanting to support a women-owned
Mhm.
business.
Yeah.
They're interested in supporting and having the expertise of a professional preservationist to
Mhm.
do the
Yeah.
work. Like very early on from the start, I decided that I would be using traditional linseed oil paints
Mhm.
in my work, that I would be focusing on like Dutchman full wood
Right. Yeah.
repairs and try to avoid some of the more modern plastic materials,
Mhm.
use what the original craftspeople would have done. And that's been really enjoyable and
Yeah.
has stretched me in many ways.
Yeah. So, well, I thank you for telling me that story. I had like two thoughts went through my brain as you were telling it. Well, maybe three. um, but just a funny thing. My dad would always tell people if they were going to try to restore their own windows to start in the back of the house. So that was my
Yes,
vision for your
way up high.
for when you were talking about your tackling a big building.
Oh yes, I
Um,
started on the third floor
yeah.
and like back office. I started with my dad's office, his office room itself. So yeah.
Yeah. And I've noticed and I don't know if it's a trend or just I have a couple theories for it, but I've noticed that there are more and more women that do window restoration as kind of like a niche within preservation. And I think that some of that has to do with, the physical demands are a little less than if you were going into a full construction project. But I think that that's great. And I'm not allowed to glaze windows because I'm not very good at it. I can
Uh-huh.
I can ice a cake, but I can't glaze a window.
I know that there are people out there who have it as a natural skill. It's not one of mine. I've had to work very hard to get
Yes.
good at glazing.
Yeah. But the other thing that I wanted to ask you about the linseed oil paint, have you had issues with that drying or mildewing or anything?
No, I haven't. You just build in the dry time. Typically,
Mhm.
it takes about 24 hours a
Yeah.
coat. So I build that into my process. And as far as the mildew, the paint that I use already has
Like a
the
zinc.
additives
Yeah.
in it
Yeah.
that is mixed
Mhm.
during the manufacturing process, so it
Yes.
has the
Okay.
appropriate amount to protect it against that
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
Yeah, I had heard, and this was years ago, that the for a while that our state preservation office was specking it, and then they were having issues with it not curing and
Yeah,
mildewing. So that's why I was just curious
one
how
one
your
of the
experience.
earliest entries when linseed oil paint pretty much disappeared here in this
Mhm.
country
Yeah.
after World War II. And when it came back into the country, it was imported. And the first company that arrived here, unfortunately, that didn't have the additives, the anti-mildew
Mhm.
additives in it. And while they could be added, there was not everyone knew that. And
Right.
so there were some really dramatic large scale failures right
Right.
at the
Yeah.
beginning that I think set back our
I'm sure
readoption
it
of
did
linseed
because
oil by decades.
yeah, yeah.
But we're back here now. I mean, if the next month's Window Preservation Alliance is focusing on linseed oil paint, I know more and more window restorers every week I'm hearing about who are adopting it.
Mhm.
This is a product that has been used for millennia and is still been used consistently in Europe. So uh, we need to learn how to use it properly, and then
Right.
it serves us very well. It's a
Yeah.
very environmentally friendly product that has low maintenance sort of concerns. and really looks beautiful. It's really appropriate for the wood and for our
Yes,
historic
yeah. Well, and
buildings.
yeah, it's it's oil based, and
Mhm.
oil based paint is better.
Yeah, I mean the examples I've seen of folks who show how deep the linseed oil like soaks into the
Yeah.
wood and offers that protection is really amazing.
Yeah. Okay, well, very good. So why is window restoration important to you, or just in a general philosophy, however you want to take the question?
Oh gosh, I mean so many reasons. I think that it's important as far as from an environmental
Mhm.
argument,
Yeah,
strongly, there is absolutely no reason that these windows should be going into the landfill when they can be pretty much infinitely repaired.
right,
And that repair can create dignified, well-paid jobs for people, I think is one of the most compelling reasons to do
right.
this work.
Yes, yeah.
It's skilled, it's beautiful. People can learn it. They can have a really good living
Hmm.
at this work, and it's local. You know, you're serving
Yes.
the people in your immediate community. So I think that it's the more economical choice. I think it's the
Mhm.
right environmental choice. I think it's also the more historically appropriate
Right.
choice. And so as a professional historian and someone who cares about the environment and about my community,
Hmm.
I don't really think there's any question about its
Yeah.
importance.
Yeah, I we had a window replacement company stop at our house this summer. And I will admit that our house is kind of like the cobbler's children. We there are maintenance things that I am aware of that need to be done. But but I walked out, and we have 4 dogs. So I was trying to keep the dogs inside. So I was already kind of irritated. And he was like, "Your windows are rotten." And I'm like, "No, they aren't." And then I said to Jonathan, I said, if I had been thinking clearly and not just irritated, I would have asked him to point out where the rot was, but I didn't. Because I'm sure he couldn't show it to me. um and then then we discussed, and then just this past week on social media, I had a vinyl window company saying not to use the composite windows because they're just sawdust. And so then I wrote in, so plastic's better. And I haven't seen their ads anymore. So I'm
Might have blocked you. Yeah, I
yeah,
think I don't blame people at all, given the just, oh gosh, I mean the
marketing.
advertising, the
Yeah,
marketing
yeah,
for replacement windows, for vinyl siding, for all of these plastic petrochemical based
right.
products in our
Yeah,
homes is so intense that most people who own homes are just doing what they think is the best. I
right.
mean, my own home is an example of this. I live in a 1941's adorable little bungalow, but
Mhm.
back in 2008, the previous owner replaced all the windows and she put up vinyl siding. And she was investing in her home
Right.
and she cared for her home. And this is the way that she did it. And, I'd like to think she didn't know any better because most people
Right. They
don't.
don't. And you're getting bombarded. I mean, watch
Yeah.
daytime TV. Every other ad's for replacement windows.
I mean, I receive an ad every week in my mail.
Oh,
And,
yeah, that too.
as restorationists, as preservationists, we don't have the means, the resources to
No.
be able to
And
flood everyone's.
there's not a company big enough to flood the space the way these large companies do.
No, and I think even if we had everybody, if 10% of our folks sort of signed on and said,
Mhm.
okay, we'll do it, we don't have the people to do the work.
Oh, that's true
Almost
too. Yeah.
everyone I know has a lead time of a year or more
Hmm.
on projects, which is why I'm so intent on we have got to train up the
We
folks who
do.
are coming
Yeah.
behind us, make
Yeah.
sure that they have a path in order to create their own companies so that
Hmm.
when people say, I do want to do it, they don't have to wait a year or a year and
Right.
a half or
Yeah.
just give up
Yeah.
because it doesn't seem possible.
Yeah. Jonathan, my started working with my dad in when he was in his early 20s, and for a long time, and that was like in the late 90s, so it was the push for everybody to go to college even if it wasn't a good fit. And I think you need a level of intelligence to do this work too. It's not just like, because that always drove my mom crazy when people would say, oh, the kids that are struggling in school, send them to vote tech. My mom's like, no, no, that's not what we need to do.
No,
But yeah,
absolutely not.
no,
Especially when
but
you think that so many of these businesses are small businesses.
yes.
The skill that it takes to run a business, to be able to successfully speak with clients, be able to negotiate, that does that takes more than just hand skills.
Yeah, yeah, and that's very true. But where was my brain going? I like got sidetracked. Oh, that Jonathan always said that he was often the youngest person on a job site.
Yeah.
And so that has always been important to us to find, right now he has an apprentice, find people that are wanting to learn how to do this and make sure that the skills do get passed on. So yeah, I think that that's very important, and we need more skilled labor across the board, there and yeah, there's a shortage everywhere.
Yeah, I believe that it is a viable career path that we can, with confidence, recommend to our
Mhm.
young people.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. So tell me about your work at Gloucester College and the historic preservation program.
yeah, so we're coming up on our 30th anniversary of the program. We were started as the nation's first distance learning historic preservation master's program, and we continue to be one of the few. We're designed for working professionals like me. That's why I chose to go to Goucher and why most of our students are there. Like the average age in our program is 38.
Okay.
So these are grown-ups, they
Yeah.
have jobs, they have families, and this typical student takes 2.5, 3 years to get through the program because they're working part-time
Yeah.
or they're studying part-time and working full-time.
Hmm.
And our students go on to do work in all sorts of preservation. I've heard some people talk about the Goucher program being a generalist program, which could be one way to describe it.
Uh-huh.
I think it does set you up to be able to go into so many different directions in preservation. We
Hmm.
have a core curriculum that is based around the key things that we believe anyone who's going into this field as a professional should have.
Right.
And then we have a nice spread of electives so students can direct their interests once they do have a better sense. Oh, I am interested in going into the economic side of
Mhm.
preservation. I'm interested in going into the planning side of preservation. We can direct them that way. And one of my favorite things to do is work with students on independent studies. So
Yeah.
if we don't have something in our curriculum, we will design it. We'll find the specialists who can bring in and work with a student to fill in this gap in their learning. And we're really closely aligned with another program in the graduate program at Goucher College, which is the Master of Arts in
Mhm.
Cultural Sustainability. And over the last 5, 6 years, we started cross-listing a lot of our courses. And, cultural sustainability is the study of the intangible cultural components. So this is more an ethnographic, folklore way of looking at culture.
Mhm.
What are the music that we wanted to maintain, the festivals, the food, some of the life ways. And there's so many wonderful intersections between heritage places and culture. You really can't have one without the
Mhm.
other. That
Right.
almost all of our students end up taking at least one class in the cultural sustainability program. And in fact, that blending of curriculum was really successful. Last month, we went
Yes.
to Nepal in January for an interdisciplinary study abroad. We took historic preservation graduate students, cultural sustainability graduate students, and environmental sustainability and management students. And we spent 2 weeks traveling all over Nepal, visiting places that were associated with heritage, culture, and environment. And what the students learned very quickly is that you couldn't visit a place that was about heritage without it also being about culture and also being about environment and how closely they were intertwined. So that I'd like to think at the end of that 2 weeks, all of them would call themselves preservationists, cultural sustainabilitists, and environmentalists. And I think that is a lot of the Goucher philosophy about how to teach preservation is this very interdisciplinary
Mhm.
field. And you'll leave the Goucher program being able to, maybe it's working for a federal agency like the National Park Service or working as a historic preservation officer in a federal agency. But you may also go on to direct a historic site or be a preservation planner in your community or be an advocate in a nonprofit organization, do tax credits. There's just so much you can do once you have learned the philosophy, the theories behind why we do what we do, so
Right.
that no matter where you end up, like in my case, I took a class on nonprofit management,
Mhm.
but really what Goucher did is it taught me how to think. So
Right.
once I took on the executive directorship of the Maryland Association of Historic District Commissions, I just learned it.
Yeah.
Same thing with window restoration and with teaching. You just pick it up once you understand, okay, these are the basic principles by which I'm doing this work.
Hmm.
Now what can I do to teach myself what's missing and what I need to know for what this next
Right.
adventure is going to be?
Yeah. 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 I think that that's really should be the focus of education is teaching you how to think. Because if you can solve problems and you can learn, there's not really much that you can't do. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. So what you kind of mentioned it earlier, but tell me about people focused practice.
It's putting the people at the center of the decisions we make in preservation. So it's decentering the building. The building is the place. It's our media in which we work. But what we're seeking to do is revitalize those places, preserve them in a way in which the community that cares most about them can
Hmm.
thrive. So, that means that when you go into a community to document a historic place, no Goucher student will graduate from our program thinking that they can just go to the archives and make their case for significance. Absolutely not. You need to speak to the people who are associated with the building and find
Yeah.
out what they care about it. What are their associations with it? And how can we work that into our cases for significance? And then, that from the very documentation point where you're bringing people in the community to ask them, why does this matter to you? To the
Hmm.
point where you start making decisions about what to do with the property, you also are bringing in the community and communities in different ways to find out how can we make this space viable
Right.
and useful and something that's going to survive into the future
Yeah.
and make our communities better.
I think that that's so important. And I often say to people, if a building is not useful, it's not going to be preserved.
Yeah.
So it has to be able to evolve and meet today's needs. There are a few buildings that are probably worthy of being museums, but not all of them are.
No,
Yeah. Yeah.
most of them aren't. And I
Yeah.
love those ones that are worthy of being museums that we have
Yeah.
decided to set aside and almost put in an amber and be able to use them as educational spaces.
Yes.
That's a lot of fun. But most of what we do in preservation is lived in
Yes.
heritage places,
Yeah.
and they have to accommodate the needs of our modern living.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very, very true. And that kind of leads us into our next question. Tell me about some of the ways that you work to engage the community into historic preservation as a way to solve other problems.
A lot of it happens in the planning process.
Mhm.
Like I said, when you go out, you're given this task of documenting a place. It's identifying the people who are associated with it, both in the present and in the past, and making sure that you're making your best effort to speak with them. It often means taking a back seat and being more of a facilitator than the person who's leading. It
Right.
means, you're facilitating people getting together and maybe presenting some initial ideas and questions for, and then sitting back and being willing to change the plans when you
Mhm.
find out that, perhaps what you originally planned for a property isn't what you had in mind, because it's not what they need.
Right.
And it does require um, more flexibility. I think as a trained historian, I was very comfortable with kind of being the expert in the room and,
Yeah.
knowing I have my documents and these are credible and authentic. And this is how I can claim my authority to say that this is significant or not significant, and this is how we should do it,
Yeah.
versus this other approach, which gets into human state, which is kind of messy.
Yeah.
And I say communities because, there is no single community that cares about a place. And even within, if you identify a community, the
Hmm.
individuals within it may have very different ideas about
Yeah.
what they want to do. And so much of the skill of working with people in historic places is coming to helping people come to agreements
Hmm.
and sometimes compromises about the best path forward for
Yeah.
the use of a place.
No, I agree. And when you said that, like there's even new building that people build something and people don't really want it or need it. And so I think that's important just in general to you need to get buy-in. You need to, talk to all the stakeholders.
And be
Um,
comfortable with not having buy-in from everybody. It's never
right.
never
Yeah.
clean
No,
there.
no, no, that's true too. But at least get them to
People,
agree, or at least some people to agree.
yeah.
Yeah. So what trends or challenges do you see in preservation?
Oh, I am definitely seeing this trend in the revitalization of the historic traits. I'm
Okay.
very excited
Yeah.
about this. And I'm going to be tracking it pretty closely. I'll continue to and do what I can to continue to bring more people into this work. I think that we're also going into a time where environmental issues, the environmental arguments for preservation are becoming much, much more important.
Mm-hmm.
We've got sea level rise, climate change, political change, all of these that are putting our historic places at risk. And it's going to require some new solutions, some reconsidering of our practices that we've had, for the last 70 or so years. And that requires some creative folks in the work, doing the work. So those are two big ones
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you on both of those. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you thought of while we were talking that you want to share?
Oh gosh, I always love to speak to anyone who's interested in preservation careers.
Yeah.
So if that's something that, you're listening to this and you're intrigued by, I'm not going to hard sell you on the Goucher program. I'm not going to hard sell you on window restoration, but I am really happy to talk to you about, where your background is, what your skills are, and how that may be parlayed into work in this field, because we need more people and we need a lot of different perspectives and expertise in our field. And I'm always happy to talk to anyone about that at any time. So
Oh,
don't
very good.
hesitate to reach out to me.
Yeah. And is there anything you'd like to promote?
At Goucher College, we've got a series of webinars this spring. We're going to be featuring some recent student scholarship. The first one we're having in March, and I'm not sure when you're going to be promoting this podcast episode, but we'll be talking.
It'll be before that, so you're
okay. Good. Okay.
Yeah.
And March 11th, we're going to have a webinar with one of our recent grads, Chris Jensen, who's going to be talking about love of place. Okay. His thesis was about communicating the connection between well-being and heritage, and I'm really looking forward to that conversation. And then in April, we'll be talking to another recent graduate, Jacqueline Shin, who's going to be talking about privacy in heritage practice. Often we think about preservation, we want to tell the full story of these places, right? But there are in fact communities which need to protect their heritage because they may be targets, or it might be something that is sacred to them. And I'm thinking beyond Native Americans. We always think about, there's sacred spaces that are associated with our Native American tribes. We want to respect that. It's also true for other communities and groups. And so she's taking on this topic of how do we as preservationists address our bias towards wanting to shout out over the mountaintops that this is an important place versus a community's desire to preserve a place, but to do it in a way that that will serve them in the best way. So those are coming up in the spring, and I would invite anyone to come to that. They'll be advertised on the Goucher website, and I'll put them on my Instagram as well.
Okay, very good. And I'll put at least a link to the website on our show notes page. And then how can listeners get in touch with you? I'm assuming the website and your Instagram.
Yeah, definitely. Follow me on Instagram at Glaze Craft Windows, and Goucher College is at Goucher Preservation on Instagram. And then you can visit the Goucher program at goucher.edu/MAHP and glazecraftwindows.com for my business.
Okay, very good. And I'm just making a note so when I do it, I have it. But thank you so much for joining me today. I enjoyed our conversation.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. It was a delight to speak with you.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Practical Preservation Podcast. The resources discussed during this episode are on our website at practicalpreservationservices.com/podcast. If you received value from this episode and know someone else that will get value from it as well, please share it with them. Join us next week for another episode of the Practical Preservation Podcast. For more information on restoring your historic home, visit practicalpreservationservices.com.